I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Wednesday, January 3rd. We begin in Edmonton, where police have moved to close encampments across the city. There are 8 in all, and yesterday, police dismantled the 3rd and 4th sites. Chris Stewart was at one of them.
Last month, a King's Bench justice at Edmonton granted an interim order to allow city police to dismantle 8 encampments in the city that were deemed high risk for fires and potential criminal issues. Justice Kent Davidson also ruled that there must be enough room in shelters for displaced people, and that they be given notice before evictions begin. If there is no room in shelters, only those that are deemed a risk to public health and safety can be closed. Police sweeps and evictions began during the last week of December. They closed 2 camps, and today 2 more camps near downtown were cleared by Edmonton police. Jordan Morgan is a volunteer with Water Warriors.
So with the unhoused community, a lot of people feel it's predominantly addicts or people that are living unsavory lifestyles. And that's not the case here. There's people that are students, new Canadians, there's an Indigenous population. There's just a lot of people who have had issues past the COVID pandemic.
Rochelle Gladue is a co-founder of Tawa Outreach Collective, an Indigenous-led street outreach group. She has concerns about the quickness of the evictions.
When they made the announcement on the 15th, they specifically stated no social services, no witnesses on site. They made a plan for up to 150 decampments. And, the last time they had such a large scale mass sweep was last May, which I believe was about 118 decampments within a whole month. So the fact that they wanted to plan 150 in a week with no witnesses was, the most concerning part.
She hopes there are enough shelter beds for everyone displaced.
They planned these encampment sweeps. They've given days notice for even this one. They gave a few days notice. So how do they know a couple days ago that there's enough shelter space today, right? Like it can change in an instant.
There was 2 individuals I spoke to, and obviously they're depressed. They're sad. They're trying to consolidate all of their life into a very small amount of space.
Floyd Lubican says he sleeps in a shelter and has been in encampments many times. He told APTN that hotels need to be built so that everyone has a warm place to sleep.
A cheap hotel, because the hotels, they're expensive. Like they got shelters, but you have to be in a certain time, and they just fill up right away.
More evictions are expected in the upcoming days. Edmonton Police Services declined to speak to APTN, saying that the situation is fluid and they will provide updates in the future. Justice Davidson will hear an injunction on January 11th to stop future encampment evictions. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Turning to some retrospectives on 2023, a year filled with firsts for Manitoba and some conflict. Sav Jonesa has more.
Starting in the winter, a new transitional housing project welcomed almost 24 unhoused individuals to their community of tiny homes in Winnipeg. It's the first of its kind in Manitoba. Astum Api Nikanak is Indigenous-led and focuses on healing in a culturally significant way.
Their spirituality and culture is a big thing in them moving ahead, doing better in their life.
According to End Homelessness Winnipeg's 2022 Street Census report, Indigenous people accounted for almost 70% of Winnipeg's houseless population. With no time limit on a person's stay, residents can heal from trauma at their own pace.
Like one of the fellows bathed in the river every day, and then when it froze, he was unable to bathe. So when he moved in here, he had a shower, a warm bed, and a warm home to sleep in.
We're not asking, we are telling you that this needs to be done.
In the summer, tensions grew between protesters calling for a landfill search for the bodies of Indigenous women and the Winnipeg Police Service and the former provincial government, who refused to do it, citing health hazards.
You will search the landfill, and if you will not, you will hand me the shovel and you will hand me the hazmat suits myself, and our community will go in there and retrieve our woman.
Indigenous leadership from around the country showed their support for the grieving families.
If we're an Indigenous person and we're in these positions, this is what we have to do. We have to break rules. We have to push boundaries. And so we're here today to come show our love and support for the families who have set up here so diligently and have to mourn so publicly.
Winnipeg Police Headquarters were defaced by some protesters calling for the WPS to do something. A few days later, The city hosted the World Police and Fire Games, bringing thousands of first responders from around the world to compete in sport competitions. More protesters took to the streets, chanting for them to go home and for WPS to search the landfill. In the fall, history was made through the election of the first provincial premier of First Nations descent, Wab Kinew.
My dad wasn't allowed to vote when he was a young man. Tonight, his son was elected to lead the province.
On election night, he reaffirmed his government's support for searching the landfill.
It is an issue that needs to be pursued very quickly because there's families who are grieving and the administration of justice needs to move along promptly.
Kinew made further history at his swearing-in ceremony when he announced his cabinet. Nahanni Fontaine and Bernadette Smith were appointed as the first First Nations women ministers in Manitoba. And Uzoma Asogwara, who is non-binary, was sworn in as the first Black queer minister and deputy premier for Manitoba. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
And it was a busy 2023 across the Northwest Territories, from unprecedented climate disasters to a newly elected government. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs takes this look back.
Athletes from across the Northwest Territories kicked off the year showcasing their skills down south at the 2023 Wood Buffalo Arctic Winter Games.
The fact that I'm able to carry this flag and for this whole territory is the biggest honor.
At the North Slave Correctional Center in Yellowknife, a new land-based education program proved to be a big hit. Inmates completed in-class and hands-on learning aimed to provide them with an opportunity for income upon release.
Keeps me calm, I actually makes me feel like I'm worthy again.
Okay, this right here too, this just started last year, this one.
The state of housing made headlines as community members went to media and voiced frustration.
It's got to be done within 10 days, but they tell me since September, okay, we don't have the windows, we have to order them, and because of COVID.
But there was some hope with the new tenants association helping renters navigate the legal system.
Should the government of the Northwest Territories be the housing provider, or should they be the regulator?
This winter, APTN drove the ice road north of Yellowknife to spend time with Cleacho Dene harvesting monitors and see the Bathurst Barren Ground caribou.
The older men would talk about the younger guys hunting. That's so different compared to when they used to go hunting.
And tragedy struck on May 6th when Gwich'in and Inuvialuit man Frank Rubin went missing from Fort Smith.
He was such an outgoing and kind person, especially, I guess, around us students.
Arguably the biggest news story of the year, wildfires. They burned earlier, they burned hotter, and they burned longer than ever before. Communities such as Hay River were evacuated more than once, and the hamlet of Enterprise burned to the ground. Climate disasters prompted conversation around the needs for Indigenous knowledge in fire management and mental health from the land.
Well, growing up, my dad was a firefighter. You know, there's been fires throughout history, but they've never been allowed to get as big as these fires have been.
It's difficult because, like, all our friends and family are all split up all over the place.
In August, when Yellowknife was evacuated, many were left in desperation for financial assistance from the territorial government. With roughly 70% of the NWT population displaced by the fires, there was also a call for an independent public inquiry into how the NWT responded.
Sharing their experiences, the lessons that may come out of it.
In the fall, APTN visited Thabatcha Fort Smith, where Métis groups were still waiting on an apology and compensation for loss of their traditional hunting rights in Wood Buffalo National Park.
Large chunks of our own land, including Wood Buffalo Park, we couldn't hunt. And we can't hunt in Alberta, Saskatchewan.
On September 30th, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, residential school survivors renewed calls for demolition of the former residential schools in Fort Smith.
Once those buildings are torn down and we can see new buildings, then maybe new life will come into Fort Smith.
And while the NWT is still no closer to having a residential treatment center, APTN continued to cover the work being done by Indigenous organizations running land-based healing and wellness programs.
In the Western world, medicine world, we can conceptualize everything, but you kind of keep your feelings and your spirit kind of is not acknowledged, or it's not part of the system.
Rounding out the year, the race was on for the territory's political hopefuls.
But a lot of the issues that we're going to be talking about tonight and that the candidates have been talking about disproportionately impact Indigenous peoples.
In November, 19 members of the Legislative Assembly were sworn in. It was a vote for change. Fewer incumbents than expected were re-elected, but one longtime politician who was and would go on to become the Premier, R.J. Simpson, Métis from Hay River.
But I'm excited. I think we have a really good crew. We made a lot of progress in the last government working with Indigenous governments, and I think that really is the future of the territory.
Simpson's election was the first time since 2011 that the top job in the territory's government was taken by somebody from a remote community. Charlotte Moritz-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
And finally, 7 Indigenous names are among those receiving new appointments to the Order of Canada. Announced last week by Governor-General Mary Simon, the list ranges from artists and activists to musicians and politicians. It includes former TRC Commissioner Willie Littlechild, Innu poet Josephine Bacon, plus Elder Albert Marshall for his dedication to promoting Mi'kmaq culture, and Inuk opera singer Diantha Edmonds for her mentorship of young Indigenous musicians. Also appointed, former BC Lieutenant Governor Stephen Point, first Inuit Senator Willie Adams, and Richard Wayne Hill Sr. was made an honorary appointee for preserving Haudenosaunee culture. The ceremony will be held on a later date at Ottawa's Rideau Hall. And that's your APTN News Brief for Wednesday, January 3rd. I'm Rick Harp.